Hello and welcome to the Millennium Sessions podcast. I'm here with,
Witczyk.
and Ada is just after giving us a lovely performance of Aeolian Dance by Oscar Gorman Tyso. I'm correct with that one, isn't aren't I?
Perfect. Well done.
Yeah.
Good job.
Well, I guess the first question I wanted to ask while seeing kind of how the whole performance worked, because it's so different than anything else we've had in the Millennium so far. We've had bands, we've had solo artists, we're having rappers and stuff coming, but nothing much from the classical world. And I just wanted to ask, kind of, what do you feel is the main differences between classical music and then maybe more like popular music styles of rock and folk and stuff like that? Like, is there a massive difference in how it's performed, how it's like how songs are composed and everything, or is it pretty similar in that aspect?
I think it depends how you look at it. You might think that classical music belongs to one space, but as we're trying to discuss, because I think it's so flexible in its format, it can be used as music just to relax at home, read a book, and have like a background music. It can be something special, like you go and celebrate anniversary with someone special to like a beautiful concert, or you might want to use it for film music, like the composer you would have heard music of before. He composes music for computer games, and so I think those worlds they're so close together. And so often these days you're going to see rappers actually using strings in their music, and I think this kind of organic merge is just so interesting.
And on that note of classical music, I found it very interesting how instead of previous acts we'd have where they'd maybe just during your recital, instead of like previous acts, they just get straight into the song. They wouldn't say what the song would be about, what inspired the song. They just get straight into playing the song. And I guess it's kind of easier for people to get it in that aspect of songs with lyrics in them, because they're talking about the story and they're telling the story through the song. But with classical music, I'm new to classical music, but I feel it's more the emotions that are portrayed in the song. You can feel the emotion, but you don't know the story behind it. And it was really nice to hear kind of what inspired the song beforehand. And would that be common practice when you're doing your recitals?
Personally, I really like to do this because coming from completely non-musical family, I appreciate that not everybody might know what the song I perform is about exactly as you said, because classical music, unless it's a area, it's a song, misses those words of explanation. So I feel like the more people understand the music is about, the faster they can connect with it. So I really enjoy maybe just giving those little hints to the audience because I'm here to connect with the audience. I'm not here just to, do my job and play it through. I really want people to remember and maybe appreciate it in the future. The same way I would go to like an art gallery. I might not know much about modern art, but thanks to the explanations next to it, I can at least read it and perhaps maybe try and, look for something hidden between those lines. It probably also depends where you go. There's some concert halls that have got rules that you're absolutely not allowed to say anything because you're supposed to just to deliver the music. But in majority of spaces where I perform, I always ask, would you mind? Can I speak? As much as the nerves are always there because you might be quite far from your audience. I just figured maybe it's a bit easier for people to connect with the music and a bit faster. Therefore,
So does it put you a bit at ease as well when you're performing to be able to tell people, look, this is what inspired the song, this is what the song's about, rather than just going into and letting them try and connect with no real they can feel the emotion in the song but no real story behind it. It puts you kind of at ease with your nerves.
oh, absolutely. Because then it's more personal and then it's more like human connection. You can interact with people, so it also helps me to relax a little bit.
And you said there that you're not from a musical family, and yet you're very talented violin player. Just how did you get started so with playing violin? Was there other kind of music you went in before that, or was it always strictly classical that you went into?
You're very kind. Thank you so much to start with. Um, so I was inspired when I was just about 3. I saw this electric pop star violinist of the 90s called Vanessa May, and on her purple electric violin, she was playing for like thousands of people on huge stages. And it must have resonated because then for years I've been asking my parents, can I play the violin? Can I play the violin? And in Poland, where I come from, the music education is free, but you need to audition in order to get to music school. You've got to sing a song or clap a rhythm. And I just got in, and then, the music education progresses. Perhaps nobody has ever seen that becoming my profession, but I guess I was really invested and also quite lucky with very keen teachers. So I think that was the key of that.
And with you becoming so interested in music and pursuing it in your education, I know you were talking earlier about how a lot of stress is kind of put on you to be put in play in a room for 8 hours practicing, and then work is supposed to find you. But was violence something that you were just that focused on that it was like, was it a chore to practice every day, or was it more something you love doing? So it's not really a chore, it's just a hobby you're very dedicated to.
It probably changed, depends on what age I was. So, of course, when you're young, there's so many other things you much rather do than work because practice, it's not fun when you have to repeatedly do a few things. It's hard work. So, there was quite a lot of encouragement from my parents because once you sign up for something, you invest the time to get better. But then when I think I was a teenager, I realized I would like to, get better, perhaps audition somewhere. So that's where the idea of coming to UK and studying at Royal College of Music came from. But then again, in classical music industry, we've got quite high standards. So that idea of perfectionism is quite alive. So you see people around you and they putting so much time and you think, if I put that much time equally, I might get better. So I think it's like a circle of, just trying to get better. I I hope it's probably lots of places these days. People are also perhaps giving students opportunities to explore those things that will help them to work as musicians as well. Maybe it's more and more in places such as, marketing or self-advertising, being your own agent, which I think is equally important these days.
Um, yeah, with classical music as well, you were also saying when you were talking about the practice and work is supposed to come and find you. But I know for the music industry as I know it, what we would be taught in college by our lovely lecturer on NEF is that you have to kind of put yourself out there, and it's not so much about the talent or how good you are, it's more about getting yourself out there. But is there a kind of a stigma around that in classical music to do things that would be outside of the traditional sense of just playing to an audience with your instrument?
Oh, absolutely, especially in my culture, being humble and being extremely modest and just doing your work is very important. But then, as your lecturer has mentioned, especially nowadays with the technology being everywhere around us in the digital world where people are coming across artists, on social media and so on, in order for your art to be discovered, you have to, put your art out there. As shy as you might be, or as you might not be used to doing it, I think just by simply trying, you get better. So I think it's equally important that part when you get better, you work on your craft, and then ways of sharing your craft, even if you're still in the process of creating something.
A lot of musicians I would know, they wouldn't be that focused really on being the best. They wouldn't. They still practice and still want to make good art and everything, but they wouldn't focus on being the best. They just focus solely on just playing music, making music, no matter how bad it is, just get it out there. And I feel like you were saying with classical music, the way it's, you're very perfectionist in it traditionally. Do you feel that kind of closes off more classical instrumentation to other artists? Like, so with the violin or even with something like a harpsichord, would be uncommon to see it in the likes of rock music. Not that it's not there, there's obviously a lot of performers who would be experimenting with this kind of instrumentation, but in terms of classically trained composers and classically trained musicians like harpsichord players or violin players, do you think it's hard for them to get involved in other music projects because of the whole traditionalist aspect about classical music?
That's a very good question, perhaps. And also, perhaps, maybe because even when we do study, those two types of music are being taught in separate places. So it's almost like we do not cross paths as often from personal experience. So you go to study classical music in one building, in one institution, and then whereas people are developing the craft in other types of music elsewhere. So as much as people might have heart for all types of genres, maybe they just do not meet that often while they're working on the music. So it all depends perhaps on the connections you make and how much you search for what you want to do. But it would be really worthwhile, and I think those kind of cross-genre projects are really, really interesting.
And you yourself, has it always been violin, or have you dabbled in other instruments outside of maybe the classical world, those kind of spaces where it's just about classical music as opposed to maybe the other spaces you were talking about? Have you ever kind of ventured into the other spaces and maybe picked up a different instrument or played your instrument in a different style?
I did few things. I am famous in my circles for being the worst pianist you'll ever come across because I didn't spend as much time, and that was perhaps part of being a teenager when at school it was obligatory to pick up a second instrument, which purely because it wasn't my choice I was quite against. So I didn't become as good. I used to do some ballroom dancing, so I was very much into exploring different art forms. It just in a very strict education that I was in a boarding school. There simply wasn't enough time during the day to do everything I wanted to do. But yeah, those ones.
And I guess we were talking earlier about the composition competitions that started during COVID and then got a bit out of hand. But that you were saying you were trying to get more, was it younger people involved in classical music? And I guess just why do you feel there's not as many people that would be involved in classical music as like the younger generation?
I think what the previous generation of our grandparents, for example, benefited was that the governments were investing in a culture that involved all sorts of things equally. So people, if they wanted to, they could equally enjoy sports, participating in sports, as much as music and culture. Sadly, nowadays, it's not on top of the list of many governments to make sure that children, they just have opportunities to try. Doesn't matter what they will do with it later. It's becoming a bit difficult to access certain things because the investments go elsewhere. So perhaps this is one of the reasons why there is a bit of a gap in our generation, because simply people didn't get an opportunity to try. So therefore, in order to also bridge that stigma that I know, coming again from non-music family, I know from personal experience what people might be thinking when you feel like you might not understand something or you don't belong, perhaps you're a bit afraid to try. So in order to find audiences where they already are, perhaps experiencing other type of music, we went to YouTube and we created content that was a bit more what people would find there, therefore the strong images and shorter format. And then we were just guessing again, it was just an experiment. If people were to discover classical music in the format where they know it, then maybe they will feel like, you know what, this is actually quite good and I enjoy it. And equally to on Monday I'm gonna listen to Beyonce, on Tuesday I'm gonna listen to Kanye West, then on Wednesday I'm gonna do some classical music, you know, because it's not that scary. So that was the hope of just trying doing that.
And with the whole bringing this on YouTube and other social media platforms, do you find it hard sometimes, maybe that battle kind of with the traditional sense of classical music, who might perceive as the work you're doing as gimmicky or something like that, battling that kind of traditionalist then with maybe younger people who would be thinking, oh well, what's this classical music doing here on my YouTube page? Is it kind of difficult to meld those two, because you've ended up doing it anyway with it's started as a COVID project and then ended up going for 5 years, so you're doing something right. But yeah, do you find it difficult, especially at the start, of kind of to get those two to kind of blend and become the project that you're working on now?
First of all, I think it's quite right to appreciate there is many people that many opinions, and so I respect that not everybody will enjoy the things that I enjoy, and that's absolutely fine, because the more diverse and different our preferences are, the more interesting, you know, the society is going to be. So that's totally fine. Yeah, and then we just tried certain things. There might have been things that didn't work, and through the comments, through the shared opinions on those platforms, we have learned. We have learned what works, what doesn't, and maybe that's another advantage of just putting yourself out there where people can comment and give you honest feedback, because that's how you can grow. And sure, if you do things, you know, they're going to be one way or another, then you're going to find out through those that didn't work, maybe what you should concentrate more next time, and then you're just going to push some boundaries just for the sake of trying things that haven't been done before.
And in terms of being in circles like the classical music world, was it hard to kind of network with people and find work within classical music? Is there kind of like, if I was someone who had practiced my whole life playing the cello and then I wanted to get work in the classical music space, would it be hard for me having no music college qualifications or something like that? Is it kind of something you have to do as a classical musician?
I think, again, it all depends. It's many people that many stories. And if there is something that you would like to do, I'm sure if you really, really want and you're, you know, pursue that path, you might find ways of doing things differently. There's probably lots of really famous and successful people who didn't get like a proper education as a certificate, as a piece of paper, and purely because of the charisma and the talent they still succeeded. So there isn't like one way of doing things. There is so many factors, I think, of having work in being arts industry slash music industry. Of course, it depends on your talent, your effort, the hard work you put into it. It depends on being respectful and kind to people, because I find this is equally important, that, you know, people you work with. They are your colleagues. They are, the work you create together. So that's very important. So therefore, you make those connections, right? You work on one project that somebody realizes this one person, it was so fantastic to work with them. It would be so good to have them elsewhere. But then also, despite all of these things, and purely again, while I was trying to promote the competition, I did some online courses on marketing to try and to promote it. And while I was growing my personal social media, some of the radius and other PR people, they have reached out to me because they simply discovered my work through social media. So I don't think anybody should I think we really should appreciate how powerful that is. And while of course it's important to put things out there that are purely, your joy, your craft, something that you create, and be really authentic with it. So while not being perfectionist, the better things you put out there, this is a representation of what you do. So that's like one more platform to perhaps gain some work opportunities.
And I think I'll just end with this question, which is just musicians nowadays, if there's anything besides maybe talent or charisma that you feel is most important for a musician to consider when making a career out of music, what would be the advice that you'd give them? Big question.
That's a big one. I can tell you what I'm thinking, but it's just me. Being inspired by one of the books I read, it was biography of Edith Piaf, a famous French singer. She said she always made her decisions, bad or wrong. So at the end of her life, however long that would be, she wouldn't regret not doing something, right? So along those lines, hopefully in the future when you look back, you don't want to regret something that you did in a bad way, or that you didn't take that opportunity. So as much as we have so many fears within ourselves and so many anxieties of trying new things, maybe sometimes along those lines where something looks so scary is just that one new thing you're going to learn while doing this. But that's just me. You never know.
Well, this interview is about you, so. But thank you very much for the chat, and it was a lovely performance, and we're very happy to have you here at the Millennium Sessions.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys.